day 85 of 365 days of remembering. Today I decided to take a seat outside. Out in nature, my favorite thing to do. And I found myself throughout my whole walk thinking about a couple things. And so ultimately I want to talk more about surrender and letting go, purification. But to start with, I want to talk about just standing right where you are, because that's what's attached to all of this surrendering, this letting go, and just being as fully present as you can. Just being, like having this clean recognition of the sense of freedom that I have. I came to the state park, I'm walking around, I'm enjoying the interesting weather today that's up and down, and it just rained yesterday and the sun wants to come back, and just knowing that all of it's just perfect right the way it is. The kids are home from school, and my daughter, my 12-year-old, and I are finding our way with what does it mean to homeschool. And my 16-year-old is kind of finding her way with a boyfriend, and she was already doing distance school, so that's not so hard. But what if just everything is just perfect the way it is? Because resistance, which is what I'm going to talk about, because that's the thing that causes the need to surrender, is when we look at something, when we see something that arises in front of us. And ultimately, as we know as conscious creators, something that we created, and we want it to be different than it is. That's ultimately what resistance is. What if we just didn't do that? What if it just didn't matter? What if somehow, some way, in whatever way it takes, we could find a way to tell a story that whatever I see in front of my face is just perfect? Because ultimately, the funny thing about what's going on right now is almost always you can find a way to say whatever's in front of my face, you choose to some degree what's in front of your face. So if you don't like knowing what's going on out there, like out there in the big world, why are you looking? I mean, that's the easiest thing. It's like that idea of, like, I'm sure we've all had this experience. I know I have. Someone else convinced me to watch a movie that I was a little iffy about because I don't like, stressful, violent kind of movies. And you start down that path, and then somewhere in there you're like, yeah, I knew I should have watched this movie, but yeah, why do you keep watching that movie? Because you don't like how it feels and you need to step away from it. So if you don't like the movie that's being generated in the collective, then don't watch the movie. Easiest thing to do. Second, then what do you do with that energy? Create your own movie, and also just love the movie that's closest to you. So if you're home and whatever it is that is right in front of your face, in different moments, take a pause, take a breath, and just appreciate the cat, the dog, your child, your partner. And if you're all alone, appreciate your house. I mean, even if you're not alone, appreciate the space that you're dwelling in. Appreciate the smell of the food that you're cooking if you're doing that. Appreciate the warmth that you feel, the sun that's shining, the rain that is bathing the earth. Appreciate the internet if that's relevant for you, that you can say that this occurred at a time when we can stay so connected with our family, with our friends, with the parts of the collective that is really vibing in the way we want to vibe through the wonderful power of the internet. If you look out your window and you see a little bird, appreciate the little bird, because guess what? The little bird thinks everything that's going on right this minute is perfect. It's not caught up in some other nonsense. It doesn't have a story that someone else told it because of something that's going on. It just is. What would it take for you to just be? And in that beingness, to just be like grounded and settled right now. Like just be like, okay. Because the funny thing is about all of this, and the funniest thing about fear and worry and anxiety and stress, and I have had my share of experiences with this, having had my husband killed suddenly in an accident. So it's not like I don't know what I'm talking about at all. But I do know that it's hardest when you're in it. And if it's like an event that happens and then it's over, we often will review it, and that can feel bad because we're sort of reviewing the experience. And I get that some of that is necessary if we're letting it go, but if we're not letting it go and we're just kind of letting it hold our space, and that's not always so helpful. But what's interesting is that we think that by having those feelings about it, like by feeling fear or by being worried and all that stuff, that it's going to drive us to a better place in the sense that, well, I'm so worried about this, so I got to do A, B, and C, or I got to figure out how to fix something. And I think as spiritual people that we have an ability to be able to settle with that, to sort of ground that energy and have a recognition that worrying probably never changed anything, in the sense that now because we know that we're conscious creators. I mean, even for people that don't know that, worrying is such a different vibration that the chances of lining up with what you think you want to be different from a state of worry is pretty much never going to happen. And it just doesn't feel good either. So now you're not going to get the shift you want, and you're just going to feel bad about it. So it doesn't seem like any of those feelings help. I mean, the idea that ultimately fear and anxiety and worry was one of those things that's gutturally, evolutionarily, genetically based to help keep us safe. Well, that makes sense. If some wild animal's chasing you, of course, darn well run. But we live in a time where that doesn't happen all that much. And what we're talking about is not something that worry is going to shift. So be conscious. That's what I would call it. Be conscious. Be aware of how you're holding your energy. Be aware of how you're holding your space. But I dare to say that for me, I know my well-being. I know that that's the flow that I am engaged with. And I know that my firm sense of control and power rests in me, not in outer stuff, not in all the things that I'm going to do anyway, because it helps settle the collective energy about it, not because I think it's the right way to do it in that sense, because I think vibration trumps everything. And so it really has to do with what I feel. It's like two different people could walk down the street of New York City and have a completely different experience. One could get mugged and one couldn't. And it's really, really hard because we can't tear it all apart and figure out exactly what it was, because we're just going to be looking at a few little pieces of the information. But ultimately they had a different vibration, and that's why they had a different experience, because they were calling the world to them, because it's always a reflection of us. So that said, I invite you to step away from the things that might be causing any kind of angst. And I even know I had a bit of that. So it's not like us spiritually conscious beings are totally immune to it. I mean, it's not like it can't still sort of come over to you and say hi, but what are you going to do with it? And be able to say, you know what, I'm going to notice what's right in front of me instead of what I'm thinking about and what I'm projecting as being out front of me or in my future. I'm just going to be here because that's what I have control over. And also, I'm going to see what that's telling me. So if I've experienced a feeling like fear, anxiety, or worry, which is so not that common for me, then I'm going to say this is a gift, because there's something behind that I'm being called to look at. And how can I do that? And so that's where surrender comes in. And the idea of surrender is that when an experience comes to us, we, as a culture, as a collective, as humans, have a tendency to not like things that don't feel good. And that just makes sense. I mean, we don't like things that don't feel good, so we want to push them away. And we really like things that feel good, so we want to pull them closer, replay them in our minds. And we really let the mind take too much control in this scenario, because ultimately, if something happens and then it's not happening anymore, it's sort of a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, holding on to something that happened and not processing it doesn't necessarily, well, it might make the immediate sensations feel better. It isn't ultimately going to it's not ultimately going to lead to the freedom we think we have. Because we think by stepping away from it or pushing it down or pushing it away, we're actually free of it. But in truth, it's then stuck in our field more because we didn't let it process through. And now we're dragging it along our path to every other experience. And then that's not helpful. That's what could be happening right now for some people, is they're being triggered by a sense of not being free, or by a sense of worry, or a sense of things that are out of their control, when you really tune into it and know you are always in control, that everything is really up to you. And there are an infinite number of potential universes and worlds and experiences and lives, and even your own experience. There's an infinite number of experiences Trina could be having right now, in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, tomorrow, the next day, next week, next year. And I am engaged in the creation of what that next moment is going to look like. And resistance plays a big part in it, because it limits what we have access to. And it also means that I am now operating from a level of resistance that the world has to reflect back to me. So I'm going to get more resistance, which then we go, yeah, that's right. So therefore I have validation of my fear. But no, it's not validation of your fear. It's just validation of your vibration, and that the law of attraction is a real thing and works. Do you want to play that game? I mean, I know I don't want to play that game, but just to be clear, I get how it's so easy to fall into that game, especially with the evidence around us that so many people fall into those states of being and those places of like, I can't imagine. I was thinking about this. I was feeling into it based on some, emails and messaging that I'd seen from some of my relatives, family, and friends. This noticing, I can't imagine what it would be like to not know who you really are, to not know you're an energy being in a body, to not have a relationship with your inner being or even know one exists, to not have source, to not understand that you're a creator, that you have some control over things in that sense of what's going on with you, to not meditate, to not know how to access those states of consciousness. And honestly, imagine what that would feel like just for a second, just to have that compassion, because it must feel like just being jerked and whipped around all over the place by circumstances that they feel they don't have control over. And so one of the things that's been poignant for me is to just stand in this place of celebration that I'm so excited and so thrilled that I've come to those knowings inside of myself. And I invite you to jump up and down and have that celebration with yourself too, because it's important, it's relevant, it's going to change everything. And to be able to just breathe into that clarity about that and that knowing, and to really use this as experience as what I've been saying in many of my videos. It's kind of like a test, like where can we fine tune? Where can we dial in more and connect more deeply with ourselves? What is it that's being called to? What resistance is there that we're being invited to look at and surrender to? And this is a beautiful opportunity to do that. And so I know my husband and I have been playing around a lot about what if we just stayed in the house we're in and we never left? We just lived in that house forever. What if we just didn't travel again because we didn't, even though we thought that a lot of our future experiences might involve some travel after the kids all moved out? What if we didn't? What if the level of lifestyle that we have right now stayed the same? What does that really have anything to do with my happiness? Because so many of us, even those of us that are spiritual, especially those of us that are into the empowerment side, that really like the idea of creating our own reality, which I like the blendedness, just to be clear with the enlightenment. But it's easy to think that to hold something out there, like, if only that, then I would be happier. If only that, then I would be happy. And yet we keep the happiness at bay by doing that, because the happiness is right inside of us, and we're stopping the flow by thinking those other things need to be so that we can be happy. And so for me, it's like, how can I surrender? How can I surrender? What if schools never opened again and your kids never went back to school? What would be called forth from you? What would you have to shift and change? Not only just in a physical sense of how you live your day, but what beliefs would you have to alter? What ideas would have to come up? How would we then as a collective come together to look at those problems in out of the box ways? Because I think that's part of also what we're being called for, is we're watching the economy crumble in the midst of all this stuff. And it's really interesting that some of the collective, as mentioned by President Trump's words, which I don't have to agree or disagree with them, but his simple words were, there is this sort of point of choice. Do we choose people and health and their well-being, or do we choose this economic system that we've created? Because it doesn't seem like we can choose both. And of course, I don't see either of those things as relevant as choices, but I don't think in that dualistic way, and lots of people do. So from that perspective, isn't that an interesting thing that one of our politicians would be faced with right at this particular moment? How amusing is that? So it just seems very poignant that this would be coming up in the collective, this idea of choosing between people and money or things. And I just want to add quickly that for a long time, when I've sat with myself and wondered why the world is the way it is, why do we have sort of offnesses in the sense of, the whole way capitalism runs, trying to get people to believe that if they buy this thing, it's going to make them happier. Why have we centered so much of our experience outside of ourselves and had such a belief that if we could just get the right car and get the right job and the right house and have all this stuff and do all these things, that was going to somehow make us happy? Why do we have that? And why is that such a focus? And why are we so fear-based and lack-based and limitation-based? And what is all that about? And what's so interesting is I've always had this belief that we showed up on this planet not knowing who we were. We didn't have access to the understanding immediately that we are source beings in a body creating our life. And so we began creating from a feeling of vulnerability. I mean, you're born as a tiny little baby and you need someone else to take care of you. And so that feeling of vulnerability just grew and grew and grew. And also because our consciousness wasn't as opened as much as it could be, we felt like we had to get something and take it and keep ourselves safe. We were really connected and tied to a belief that we needed to eat a certain amount of food, and if we didn't, we were going to starve. And we had a lot of erroneous ideas about who we really are. And from those ideas, we created this world. And now we've just created these systems, and they've got lives of their own and have momentum. And we all love buying crap and thinking that that's, I'm not saying it's not fun, but it really isn't the basis of who we are and what's going to make us happy. Ultimately, those are fleeting peak experiences, but that's what we created our life from. And so I feel like it's really interesting because now we have the opportunity to think outside the box and start really using this time to think about what we would want to create. If we had the opportunity to do that from an intentional place, what would we want to create? How would we want to live? What would we want our flow of experience to be? And that's what I invite all of you to take some time and do that. And if you want to share in the comments, I'd love to hear that. I think it would be really cool to get a movement going where we're all talking about what we want this awesome new world to be like. And most of us as spiritually conscious beings have a belief that the vibration of the planet is being raised, that we're coming into a time when we have access to new ideas and the box is getting broken open. So if you like this video, please like it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you enjoy this style of my flow, or if you're interested in having some conversation and talking about these kind of things. Share my videos if you like them, hit the bell if you want to know when I go into flow next time, which seems to be every other day at this point. And keep on vibing up, and I will see you in more